The year is 1862, and Japan is in the final years of the Edo period, known as the Bakumatsu, with the Tokugawa shogunate barely holding on to power. Previously under the shogunate, Japan kept a very strict close borders policy, allowing just a handful of Dutch and Chinese trading vessels into their ports. But then American warships showed up to make it very clear that Uncle Sam wanted in, and the shogun was forced to finally open the island to the outside world, ending over 2 centuries of isolation. This meant that foreigners who had little to no understanding of Japanese society were now free to travel into the country where samurai very much still enforced the old ways of Bushido. So surely, a little, totally avoidable misunderstanding wouldn't send the shogunate into crisis and the samurai to war with the British Empire, right class? Who the hell are... Well, our story begins with a man by the name of Charles Lennox Richardson. Richardson was young, rich, and freshly retired, something the economy just wouldn't allow nowadays. He spent years as a merchant in China making himself a fortune, and was now on his way back to England, but first decided to do a little trip to Japan before it was mainstream. He, along with fellow merchants Winthrop Clark and William Marshall, who for some reason was also traveling with his sister-in-law, decided to make the sightseeing trip to the temple of Kawasaki Daishi, traveling on the main imperial road known as the Tokaido. But Richardson suffered from an ailment known as being British in the 19th century, causing him to have little respect for others, especially if the others in question weren't white. This wasn't previously an issue for him in Shanghai, but Japan was nothing like China, as the population still carried a strong resentment of foreigners, something Richardson wouldn't let get in the way of his retirement party. You sure this is a great idea, Richard? We have no idea what to expect from the locals, it's not particularly sunny. Relax. I've been living in China for almost 20 years. I think I can handle these people. Yeah, but these people are Japanese I'm talking about, and we know almost nothing about them. Well, they're basically just Chinese in denial, okay? We'll be fine. And fine, they were not. One thing Richardson and his party was unaware of was the official hierarchy of Japanese society. Back home, the usual steps of the social ladder were something like this, while in Japan, they were more like this. As you can see, merchants such as Richardson were considered to be the scum of society, ranking even under the artisans and peasantry, with the separation of the social classes being still very much in effect at the time of their journey. On the other side of the social ladder and the road to Kawasaki Temple were the samurai, and not just any samurai, but an entire armed retinue of the particularly troublesome Shimazu clan. They ruled over the Satsuma domain, and were one of the wealthiest, most militarized, and generally rebellious clans in Japanese history, with a particular distaste for foreigners. Eerily Republican, I might add. The clan also openly questioned the shogunate's weakness in dealing with the West, believing that Japan had been humiliated into conceding its borders, and saw force as a perfectly reasonable answer to such disrespect. Now, especially in the Bakumatsu era, domains like the Satsuma were effectively doing whatever they wanted, because the shogun couldn't really afford to force them into submission anyways, and loyalty was mostly towards the clan and not to the shogunate. Daimyos were still required to occasionally travel to the capital to convince the shogun they were still friends, and Shimazu Hisamitsu was on his way back home from the rebound meeting, heading down the Tokaido road towards Richardson and his friends. Speaking of which, around the same time, Richardson and his buddies crossed Yokohama harbor into the village of Kanagawa to pick up some horses that were sent ahead. There, local officials warned them not to take the main road of Tokaido that day, as the Shimazu procession was expected to be crossing there. And it's safe to assume the locals realized why that could be a problem. I don't understand jack shit, Rich, but it's clear they're warning us of something. Let's just turn around. That's because you haven't brought them any fish, Will. At least try to feed them rice from your hand or something. God, why does everyone want to ruin my retirement party? You're screwed. Richardson's party continued north towards the nearby village of Namamugi when they came face to face with the procession of one of the strongest men in Japan, escorted by dozens of samurai in strict formation. Japanese customs required anyone of a lower status to stop and dismount, showing respect to the daimyo as his procession passed, and failing to do so was considered a great insult to the lord himself. But Richardson simply had to be that guy, so even with all the guards shouting and gesturing them to stop, he couldn't keep himself from riding into the procession and between the samurai, getting closer and closer to the daimyo himself. Richard, back off! They are clearly telling us to stop and get off the horses. William, for the last time, I know how to handle these people. We're not turning back because of them. Having messed around too much, Richardson found himself on the receiving end of a katana swing, in something called Kirisute Gomen. It is unclear who exactly delivered the katana blow, but either way they got Richardson pretty good. He and his party tried to make a run for it, but Richardson's wounds were so deep that he was eventually left behind, while his friends continued to retreat. When Shimazu forces caught up to him, Richardson was given 1, or depending who you ask, 11 final blows to end his suffering. And just like that, a citizen of the British Empire had been killed on Japanese territory, in what's come to be known as the Namamugi Incident. You beasts, one of yours murdered one of mine in cold blood. Hand him over! I'm afraid we haven't invented extradition yet. Fine then, pay us our compensation and at least make sure they get prosecuted. Yeah, of course, already on it. Alright class, now I want you to put yourselves in the shoes of a Japanese magistrate and say who was in the wrong here. It's clear that one of the Shimazu retainers killed Richardson, who hasn't exactly attacked them or anything, right? Right, wrong. If you would have paid any attention, you'd remember that Richardson received something called Kirisute Gomen. Kirisute Gomen was a samurai's right to deliver a katana hit onto anyone of a lower social standing if they quote-unquote insulted their honor. And since Kirisute Gomen was considered a legal form of self-defense, those who claimed it also had to check a couple of conditions, which, again, depending on who and when you ask, go something like this. The target had to insult your honor or the honor of your lord, because loyalty above all. You're limited to one hit, so you cannot unleash a combo attack. The attack has to be delivered right after the insult and not as an act of revenge. The target had to be of a lower social standing than the samurai, and certain professions like doctors and midwives were accepted from receiving Kirisute Gomen while at work or on their way to work because their job could require them to do morally questionable things. So, what do we do? Well, how could Richardson have known about this? He was in a foreign country for the first time. This shouldn't apply to him. You American by any chance? Yeah, why? Just asking. And while the British tried to make the same argument, we shouldn't forget that magistrates often made most of their money from donations from clan elders like the Satsuma, so even if they were interested in looking at the evidence, the trial would have gone something like this. Free to go? Free to go. The British were fuming, and kept demanding reparations from the Bakufu and the daimyo of the Satsuma, together with the arrest and execution of the perpetrators. In their view, Richardson was exempt from Japanese cultural requirements under the Anglo-Japanese Friendship Treaty, making his death under Kirisute Gomen an act of cold-blooded murder. And this put the Shogun into a pretty tough situation. On one side, giving in to British demands and holding the Shimazu accountable could cause them to revolt, and the shogunate wasn't exactly rolling in it to quell a rebellion. But on the other, the British threatened to do one of their specialties on the Japanese capital. So the shogun was like, can't we just pretend we don't know those guys? But they are your subjects, sir. Does that mean I have to defend them if the British decide to sort it out directly with them? I mean, you're the shogun, so not really. Cool. By mid-1863, Britain was growing more and more impatient with the reparations for the Namamugi Incident, and in July, the Bakufu/Shogun/Shogunate had no choice but to reluctantly pay £100,000, or roughly 60 million in today's money, as compensation, mostly under the threat of the Royal Navy unleashing cannon fire on the capital of Edo. Still, the Satsuma domain was having none of the British nonsense, and kept ignoring their demands while also refusing to even apologize for Richardson's death. In their view, foreign scum severely insulted the clan's honor, and even asking for an apology was deemed preposterous. I'm starting to feel like we're gonna have a problem about the rest of that money, mate. Look, I'm sorry, but we've already given you a third of our peasants' income. Go figure the rest out with those maniacs yourselves. And figure it out, they did. On the 15th of August 1863, the Royal Navy nostalgically entered the foreign waters of Kagoshima, the capital city of the Satsuma domain, reminiscing about the good old times consisting of bringing the bad times to those less fortunate. They were determined to claim the reparations by force, and seized multiple Satsuma vessels as bargaining chips to force the domain to negotiate. But what if they don't want to negotiate? What if they Kimimaru Gohan us too? If the queen had balls, she'd be the king. Of course they will negotiate. Britain has ruled the seas for centuries. But we don't even know how they fight. Look, rookie, it's the textbook scheme. We come and grab a few of their vessels to show them that they don't stand a chance. They give in to our demands to make us go away, and everybody's happy. We know how to deal with these people. Shut up. Before anyone spoke a word, Satsuma coastal batteries fired towards the Royal Navy, and in a single shot, both the captain and commander of the British flagship HMS Euryalus got served the Richardson treatment by the samurai. The Royal Navy retaliated by launching an all-out bombardment of Kagoshima, but the city had already been evacuated by that point. The Satsuma batteries kept firing until they were ultimately silenced in the bombardment, which the British were unable to keep up and had to abandon after just 2 days. Ultimately, the battle ended with 5 losses on the side of the samurai and 11 on the British. Still, despite forcing them to retreat, the British managed to resort to Plan B and destroyed over 500 houses in their bombardment of Kagoshima, while also sinking 3 Satsuma steamships. Despite of the controversial nature of the attack, British Vice Admiral Augustus Cooper got promoted to the rank of Knight Commander of the Most Honorable Order of the Bath for his invasion, or I guess services at Kagoshima. And at the same time, the head of the Shimazu clan was also given the court title of Osumi no Kami, or Governor of Osumi Province, a position he already held by the way, in honor of his heroic defense of the homeland, so the least you could do is to subscribe. A military stalemate eventually led to negotiations between the British and Satsuma regarding the Namamugi Incident, with the domain being particularly impressed by the superiority of the Royal Navy, and looking to instead establish a trading relationship with Britain as a result. That same year, the Satsuma would ultimately go on to pay the British reparations of £25,000 with money which they borrowed from the shogunate, so nothing really, and thus they ended the conflict that became known in Japan as the Anglo-Satsuma War. Did they at least pay the shogun back for the trouble? Oh yes! After arming themselves with British help and forming the Satsuma-Choshu alliance, they would go on to decisively help overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate during the Meiji Restoration 5 years later. But that topic is for the next lecture. Next lecture? Aren't you just a substitute teacher? Oh no, don't be silly. I'm not a teacher. See you next time!